Florence is an itty-bitty video game praised for its ability to accurately convey the feeling of falling in love in 30 minutes. It's one I personally have thought of frequently since playing for the first time, and that was well over a year ago. But how exactly does it accomplish this? The game's mechanics are as simple as they can possibly get, and Florence's story isn't a particularly flashy or unique one. In fact, if anything, Florence's story is so impactful because it's painfully familiar, and that familiarity is precisely what allows this game to pack the punch it does in such a short period of time. Florence Yo is a 25-year-old woman living on her own post-grad. Despite belonging to a demographic that traditionally struggles to find full-time work and often still lives with their parents, Florence has a small apartment and a steady job. So on paper she would seem to be doing great, except she is so obviously not, and that her life is entirely devoid of passion. Her job pays the bills that it needs to pay, but she doesn't seem to harbor an ounce of love for it. She takes care of herself, but even small tasks such as brushing her teeth seem to drain her. Her day-to-day routine is bland to the point that it has literally stripped the color from her life, with everything in these beginning segments consisting of monochrome black and white shades and a dull blue to reflect the monotony of Florence's everyday existence. But why does her life have to be as dull as it currently is? A significant aspect as to why Florence seems to perceive existence as just a slog to get through is the fact that she doesn't seem to have any meaningful connections in her adult life. She calls her mother on a somewhat regular basis, but clearly has at best a contentious relationship with her, with there being obvious resentment on Florence's end during their calls. The player is led initially to assume this is likely due to the fact that Florence's mother seems somewhat naggy, given the fact that Florence seems borderline desperate to get off the phone with her. But the biggest cause of this resentment is rapidly clarified in-game in a segment entitled Memories. Memories is the segment in which vivid color is first introduced in-game, following a 7-year-old Florence as she delights in crafting bright, colorful artworks of her own. And yet although Florence clearly derives a significant amount of joy from her art, she is suddenly forced to stop as quickly as she began by her mother, who forces her to spend her time pursuing more practical fields of study like mathematics. Florence's art, hobbies, and passions are then relegated to a box in the closet as Florence attempts to do what she believes would best please her mother, abandoning everything in favor of more pragmatic traditional pursuits. It's a decision that allowed Florence to find the financial success that she knows now in adulthood. But while Florence is good enough at these other fields of study, they stir nothing within her. If anything, she feels she has been robbed of the opportunity to attempt to find success on her own terms in favor of pursuing a palatable safe guarantee, applied a significant number of aspiring artists can relate to. After being stripped of passion, what is left is connection. But as Florence ages, she finds it progressively more and more difficult to sustain the friendships that were forged so easily in childhood. At this point, we see that she's been in relative isolation for quite some time, which has doubtlessly contributed to the dreariness that defines her day-to-day life. Yet despite her life being so bland and colorless, we are presented with a wonderful possibility for change in the online dating profiles Florence swipes on seemingly whenever she gets a chance. They are the only things in the first portion of the game that are distinctly colored, signifying that Florence likely views romantic connection as the thing that will help bring joy back into her life. This state of isolation is not unknown in any way to the average American young adult, with numerous studies indicating American youth are historically the most isolated they've ever been. According to a study by the Prince's Trust, 30% of young people say they don't know how to make new friends and they've never felt more alone. The Survey Center on American Life reports that Americans without any friends have increased 400% since 1990. Florence's quiet melancholy beautifully capturing the pain that so many people around her age currently experience. Florence additionally captures the common phenomenon of people attempting to provide themselves the connection they feel they lack through romantic relationships, a trend that typically never goes well. Everything in Florence's life drastically changes the moment that she hears a celloist's music, with her being enraptured by the notes to the point that she quite literally walks on air. She develops an immediate, although light-hearted infatuation with the celloist in question, perceiving him and his music as drenched in gold, and it's easy to see why. He plays with passion, his music invokes life in all around him, and he is clearly and completely absorbed in the thing he loves best. In other words, he's a person living the life Florence likely wanted for herself but lacked the courage to pursue, although it's certain that this isn't something Florence consciously registers. By chance, the pair meet, and Florence learns the celloist's name, Krish, and it's at this point where the game implements what is personally one of my favorite mechanics. When Florence and Krish are on their first dates, in order for Florence to formulate her responses, you have to solve a short puzzle that forms a speech bubble. However, unlike most other games where the puzzles would progressively become harder as the conversation progresses, the opposite happens. The more that Florence speaks, the easier the conversation flows, with the puzzles actually growing simpler the closer that she grows to Krish until they reach a point where things seem to almost naturally fit together. The two kiss, and the moment they do, color is restored to Florence's life in full. Florence and Krish proceed to have a beautifully fun, borderline whirlwind romance. The two divulge their dreams quickly to each other, each being shrouded in shimmering gold. Krish wants to be a professional celloist, his passion and vigor quietly inspiring Florence every time he shares it. In private, Florence even starts to imagine a world in which she can pursue her own dreams of creating art. As they grow closer, Florence realizes that Krish wants to apply to the Academy of Music, a move that would doubtlessly further his career and glide him closer to where he wants to be. But much like our Florence, Krish seemingly lacks the courage to actually take the essential steps. Florence herself likely recognizes this quality in him and pushes him to apply, likely unwilling to watch him make the mistakes that she herself did. Krish in turn encourages Florence to pursue her own artistic dreams, purchasing her paintbrushes and a color palette. Together, the two's relationship progresses rapidly into the passionate highs of the honeymoon phase. They integrate their lives closely together, sharing their hobbies and cultures and introducing one another to their family and friends. They fight occasionally from time to time in the way that any two people whose lives are so closely intertwined do, but always strive to turn towards each other and make up. Florence even begins drawing again. Yet unfortunately, all relationships must stand the test of time, and Florence and Krish are no exception. It's easy to settle into the comfort of a routine, but just as easy to stagnate within it. And, following a year of living together, it unfortunately seems that this is the trap our protagonists have fallen into. Krish's music no longer brings him the joy it previously did, with him finding himself frustrated by it more often than not. Florence's attempts to reconnect with art have been drowned by other life obligations. They grow distant literally and metaphorically and are dissatisfied in seemingly every area of their lives, including with each other. When they fight, their fights are significantly harsher, with the puzzle pieces that comprise their speech bubbles consisting exclusively of rough edges and being assembled automatically, suggesting the two are putting no thought into what it actually is they're saying and are simply attempting to hurt each other in as swiftly and efficiently a manner as possible, neither stopping even as both are crying. Now, how does what seemed to be such a strong relationship disintegrate in such a fashion? The game never provides us a concrete explanation for why Florence and Krish erode in the way they do, but what it does supply are all the context clues needed to draw a conclusion. The first thing that comes to mind is that both Florence and Krish mutually stop making the effort necessary to keep the relationship fresh. Both have been relying on the highs of the honeymoon phase to sustain them and supply a significant amount of their happiness, and the moment those highs dissipate, they grow distant. When each party enters a particularly stressful period of their life, they feel they can no longer find the comfort they once did in their partners, making the pair resentful to the point they begin to vent their stress on each other. From Krish's perspective, it is beyond exhausting being the person that is the sole positive thing in their partners' lives. And from Florence's, it is beyond painful watching the passionate, loving person you fell in love with become a bitter, jaded shell of themselves, even if that bitterness is only the product of their current season. Love and love alone cannot sustain them because they are both using their connection to each other to fill gaps in their lives they alone can fill. Florence with her happiness, and Krish with his inspiration. Florence and Krish gradually come to the terribly painful conclusion that although they love and care about each other, they are fundamentally incompatible. The puzzle pieces no longer fit together no matter what way they're organized, and the color once again begins to bleed out of their lives as they unravel. Once alone, Florence's life is just as dreary and colorless as it was at the beginning. Only this time, there's a gaping hole Krish's presence once filled that Florence must now figure out how to fill herself, and it's this process that helps Florence ultimately find meaning. The most difficult part of the game is arguably the most simple, a short segment rather simply entitled Letting Go. In it, you must relinquish the idea that you and your partner can ever make amends. All you have to do is not touch a button, and yet the urge to remain strong throughout the entire segment. And yet, once you finally summon the courage to let go, Florence is finally able to wake up. Using the palette Krish gave her, Florence commits herself to pursuing art in the capacity she's always wanted. She makes amends with her mother, who sees her joy and supports her in starting her own business. In these final chapters, we watch as Florence adopts a cat, joins artistic communities, and quits the job that's brought her so much stress and misery in favor of growing her business further. And it's in these final moments her colors are brightest. Personally, I love the fact this is the approach the game takes to love. Many games that attempt to enact similar messages often fall into the trap of branding the pursuit of love as a frivolous waste of time. But Florence's growth is in many ways made possible through the experiences she has while in love. Having a connection to somebody that embodied the passion and vigor she herself wished to hone towards her own craft allowed her to verbalize her own dreams and motivated her to pursue her own. It's why Florence doesn't recoil from the photo that she sees of her and Krish at the end, with her being able to acknowledge that she is better off for having had that connection. Although they had a painful ending, through it, Florence has learned how to live with herself and instill meaning and color into her own life. and that is the ultimate beauty of the game.